Hi, my name is Dr. Daniel Fox. I'm a licensed psychologist in the state of Texas and an expert in the area of personality disorders. And I wanted to continue my video series on anxiety and borderline personality disorder. And today we're going to cover social anxiety and borderline personality disorder. Now, social anxiety adds to the feelings and behaviors that promote isolation, fear, uncertainty, and paranoia, which makes managing those borderline personality disorder symptoms and traits much, much harder. Now, anxiety disorders, the research shows that anxiety disorders have been found to make it harder to experience that remission phase, that remission of symptoms. And that is where individuals with borderline personality disorder are not exhibiting or externalizing or expressing those symptoms. So anxiety disorders make it much more difficult to kind of hit that spot, that area, that remission period. Okay. And also what happens is that symptoms, borderline symptoms over time, that they actually increase the risk. Anxiety symptoms increase the risk of individuals with borderline personality disorder engaging in suicide attempts, as well as self-injury. So anxiety disorders can certainly exacerbate a lot of that difficulty and really overlap and really complicate trying to manage symptoms, because are they borderline symptoms, or are they social anxiety disorder symptoms? And which is which, and a lot of folks with borderline personality disorder also have anxiety disorders. So it makes it hard to tease that out. So do you work with the chicken, which we could say that it's social anxiety, or is it the egg, which is the borderline personality disorder? And we're going to talk about that today, and I'm going to talk about a technique that I use with a lot of my clients and refer you to a video if you're interested in that as well. So what are we going to try to do today? Well, I want to help you gain an understanding into the aspects of social anxiety to help you recognize, manage, and control it. Okay, so how do social anxiety symptoms, how do they connect, overlap, intersect with those borderline personality disorder symptoms and issues? So let's kind of talk about what these different symptoms of social anxiety are and how they impact those borderline personality disorder symptoms. So for social anxiety symptoms, these are like intense fear or anxiety. It's one or more social situations in which you feel sort of exposed or possibly being negatively evaluated by others. And these social interactions, right, they can include having a conversation, meeting unfamiliar people, a job interview. Could also be that you feel like you're being watched. Now, that's not like paranoia, because this is a sense of embarrassment. Paranoia is that you think people are watching you to harm you, but social anxiety is that you're worried that people are watching you and that you'll do something embarrassing. So when we talk about like being observed, we talk about like someone will see you eating or drinking or even working out, that you're worried that you're being negatively evaluated. And then it could also be like performing in front of others, like you have to give a speech, or if it's a crowded area and you have to talk to a group of folks, not necessarily a formal speech, but you have to talk in front of others as well. And what happens with individuals that also have borderline personality disorder is that these folks are often afraid of looking bad. And they're afraid of being evaluated negatively because they're being seen as inadequate, particularly in situations that they can't control, such as the ones that we listed. So individuals with borderline personality disorder are constantly on the lookout of how they're being perceived. It's this degree of hypervigilance. And I think that that's where, we're going to talk about other symptoms as well, but this one in particular, I think that it does intersect a lot with that social anxiety, this particular symptom, as well as with borderline personality disorder. So it's pretty common to see these two interacting. Now, just because these two coexist doesn't mean that the individual with borderline personality disorder also has social anxiety, because you have to go through the other criteria, the other symptoms, which we're going to talk about now. So another symptom of social anxiety to consider is that this individual will fear that you'll act in a way that will show your anxiety, and that you'll be negatively evaluated for that component. And you'll be humiliated, you could be rejected, you could be embarrassed. And individuals with borderline personality disorder are always sort of struggling with that issue. And that's because, they're afraid to show their genuine emotion and fear that, or in their core content, or really where they're coming from and how they're functioning, what they really believe about themselves in a lot of cases, because they're afraid right? That there could be a risk of being humiliated, harmed, or taken advantage of. And what they do is they put up their shield. Okay? And when they put up this shield, it sort of protects them, it pushes people off, and that shield is sometimes to protect themselves from the anxiety that they're experiencing associated with this particular component. And if you're like, well, which are you talking about? You're talking about social anxiety, you're talking about the borderline personality. And that is part of that confusion, right? Because these two aspects really are very closely intertwined, right? Because we were just talking about it. It's fear that you'll act in a way that you'll be embarrassed, that will show those negative symptoms. And if you're trying to push it down and hide it, but then you're afraid that people recognize it, so then you feel exposed, which then can increase the probability of you engaging in those negative beliefs, behaviors, and patterns that perpetuates your borderline personality disorder. It makes it harder to get to that remission period where you're not having symptoms. Now, for some folks listening to this, you might be like, what is he talking about? That doesn't make any sense. But for folks with borderline personality disorder who are watching this, are likely, and you may have to listen to it a couple times, what I just said, and that's understandable, but be like, yeah, I get it. And I deal with that a lot with my clients too. They're trying to present in this particular way. There's so much anxiety associated with it. And this particular component that we're talking about, social anxiety, is very common to see in folks that have borderline personality disorder as well. Now, this next symptom and criteria, this is avoid or endure situations with intense fear or anxiety. Okay? Now, a lot of folks with borderline personality disorder, they often seclude themselves out of fear of bumping into others. I had one individual who wrote me, and it was this wonderful experience that was not positive wonderful, but it was very expressive, and it was very genuine about how she kind of lives her life. And what she says is that she kind of lives her life in bumper cars, and that is that she's trying to steer away from others, but folks continually bumping into her. And if you've ever done bumper cars, so you're trying to hit other people, but also avoid people at the same time. And I think a lot of folks with borderline personality disorder can kind of relate to that, is that you have this fear and anxiety associated with borderline factors, and you're trying to avoid folks, but people keep kind of slamming into you. And so bumper cars, I think, is a really good analogy. And when to expand on that more, it's about bumping into others, because this increases that anxiety associated with individuals that have borderline personality disorder. And when the anxiety increases, that kicks up those borderline personality disorder symptoms, okay? And they can kick them up to a level where the individual cannot control it, and they fall into that automatic pilot, that default negative belief, behavior, and pattern that perpetuates the borderline personality disorder. So anxiety, particularly social anxiety, or avoiding or enduring situations that have intense fear and anxiety, that makes it harder to control and kind of have a handle on a lot of those borderline personality disorder symptoms. Okay? But we have other symptoms to cover as well. But I think you can see so far as we're going through this how these all connect, that the anxiety certainly exacerbates the borderline personality disorder. Let's talk about more criteria. So the next criteria of social anxiety is fear or anxiety that is out of proportion to the actual threat posed by the social situation, okay, and the context that the individual is in. And what happens is that individuals with borderline personality disorder, that once they reach this particular level, and it is very individualized, right, as to some folks reach that level very quickly, where their response is very, very inconsistent with the stimulus that's presented, with the anxiety, because we're talking about social anxiety, with the fear and anxiety, with the particular stimulus that set them off. Now, some folks with borderline personality disorder, that they have a greater tolerance for this discomfort, and they have these strategies that they use that help them manage some of those symptoms and control those reactions. But not everybody does, because it's all different, right? Everybody's borderline personality disorder who has this particular issue or traits, that it's different in everybody. Okay, so for this particular aspect about that response that's out of proportion, it's very common to see that reaction. Now, for some folks, with some of my clients, we call it majoring in the minors. Making a mountain out of a molehill, right? Other things, because the response is so intensive compared to the issue that has occurred. And what happens is that the purpose of this response, of this incredible response, is to lessen the anxiety and fear that is associated with the situation. But what it actually tends to do is that it tends to exacerbate, make the situation much worse. It also tends to amplify how the individual feels about themselves, which is typically very bad. It can also negatively impact how the individual perceives the situation, perceives others that were in that situation. So the outcome of this massive response tends to carry a lot of guilt and shame with it as well. And it's very common for folks with borderline personality disorder to experience a lot of shame and guilt. I've done a video on that as well. I'll put a little clip for you if you want to check that out here. This is very common, but we're talking about that social anxiety component of that reaction that is disproportionate to the situation that they're in. And it's very common for folks with borderline personality disorder to have that. Okay? And then the next symptom is that it is fear, anxiety, or avoidance. Okay? And this is persistent. The avoidance is critical. It's that fear, that anxiety, and it's that you avoid those situations. And it has to occur for at least 6 months or more. So for a lot of folks with borderline personality disorder, they've been doing this for a really long time. Okay? So it's very common for avoidance of stressful situations to hear that with folks that have borderline personality disorder traits. And what happens is that the individual sort of build this into routine, particularly avoidance. And in some cases, avoidance is adaptive for a lot of folks with borderline personality disorder. And that's because you have to avoid certain triggers, right? Certain individuals, certain situations. But this is a little different. Now, avoiding a situation because it is adaptive for you, because it's healthy for you to avoid those particular people or those particular situations is a good thing. If you are avoiding it out of fear and anxiety, okay, then we go more towards the side of social anxiety, a social anxiety component. And the last component that I want to talk about, and this is the fear, anxiety, and the avoidance. Now we're including avoidance as well, that this causes socioeconomic dysfunction. And that is that it negatively impairs your ability in social settings, economic settings, or at school, right? And it also impairs your ability, right, to make a living, to manage yourself, to live every day. So it has to significantly impact how you live your life every day and how you earn a living, make a living, function with folks, take care of your kids, take care of your family, take care of yourself. Okay, so the anxiety has to factor into that, not just the borderline personality disorder. But I think all of these criteria we've been talking about, it makes it really hard to separate these out, and it's very common. And it's okay to say, well, you know, borderline personality disorder for individuals who have that or traits, to say, well, yeah, social anxiety is a big component for me. Okay, and it's a good thing to learn that, to build that insight, because in a nutshell, what we want to do is you want to build understanding for individuals that have borderline personality disorder, that for those who want to be around people, right, and for a lot of folks with borderline personality disorder, it's almost like they're driven with this need to be around others, okay, and to connect. But a lot of times that fear, anxiety, those maladaptive coping strategies, this puts them at this disadvantage to engage properly and to manage social anxiety situations, and without building those proper skills. And so there's a technique that I use with a lot of my clients called ACE. I'll put the clip here. There'll also be a little clip at the end as well. And this might be able to help you as well. There's a worksheet attached to it to kind of help reinforce some of these skills. Because what's so important, and what's really important to me about doing these videos, is to help folks with borderline personality disorder, to help them build these skills so they have greater control over themselves, they have greater control over their life, and they're more efficacious in the situations that they're in. And those socially anxious situations, fear of embarrassment, fear of not having control, fear of whatever else it may be, those social anxiety factors, about building that control, building that understanding. Because if we can lessen those anxiety symptoms, it can help lessen the impact of those borderline personality disorders. And that's exactly what we're trying to do here. I hope that you found this video helpful. If you did, please leave any comments or suggestions that you may have. I always enjoy the comments. I try to read them all if I can, as best I can. If you enjoyed this video, please subscribe or watch some of my other ones. That would be great. Thank you very much. And again, I really hope that you find this helpful, and please take care of yourself and be well. Thank you. Thanks for your time. Bye-bye.